Hey Defenders, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you guys an awesome tool that we can use to monitor our Linux endpoints, and that is Tetragon. Now, Tetragon is eBPF based, which allows it to hook into the kernel to monitor all activity happening on our Linux endpoints. Activities such as process executions, processes that are being exited, system calls, network telemetry, and allows us to get a really good deep dive into what is happening on our Linux endpoints. And it also supports a wide range of environments, from just monitoring a VM as in running Tetragon as a service to also monitoring Kubernetes clusters, Docker containers. It can really fit well into any of your environments. And we're also going to pair it with the Wazoo agent so that we can capture all that telemetry that Tetragon is collecting for us and send that to our wazuh-manager and store that into our SIEM stack. So this Tetragon by no means is replacing your Wazoo agent, but this is another great example of how we can take our core Wazoo agent and add on monitoring capabilities by tacking on Tetragon and then using our Wazoo agent to collect that data and send it into our SIEM stack. And again, because Tetragon is leveraging eBPF, it can be used for even blocking binaries. It can be used to even block processes from even doing something, depending on what Tetragon rules. So it can be used to block processes and binaries from even executing certain actions. So it can even be used for some proactive defense, which is really awesome as well. So because it hooks into kernel functions, it's so powerful. And in this video, we're going to install it and configure our Wazoo endpoint to ingest those events. So let's go ahead and get into it. So from an installation perspective here, I'm just going to deploy it with a package. And you'll notice that we have a command here that we can copy to download the gzip. We're then going to extract that gzip, and then they have a nice little install script that will install Tetragon for us. So I'm just going to paste that command here on my Linux endpoint. If I ls this out, we now see this Tetragon directory here, which again, still is just our gzip. So I'll go ahead and extract that data. You'll see it has extracted that. If I ls this out, we now have our Tetragon directory here. I'll cd into there, and then we have this install.sh script. So go ahead and run that script, and it will go ahead and install Tetragon for us. So super easy, really easy to install and get up and running. And what's also convenient is that it also runs as a service as well. So if I do a systemctl status Tetragon, we see that our Tetragon service is up and running. So really easy to help manage as well. So what's actually happened here? So we've installed Tetragon, but now what? Well, if we tail out, so by default, Tetragon is configured to monitor our process executions and processes that are being exited. So if we tail out our var log tetragon.log file, here we do see some entries, and let me go ahead and duplicate another session, and let me open, I'll do a cat command on etc password, for example. And sure enough, we see my command has been executed here. We see cat on etc password. So we're now monitoring commands that are being ran on our Linux endpoints as well, right? Which by default, the Wazoo agent is not doing that. But what we're going to use the Wazoo agent to do is to ship these events to our SIEM stack. But first, let's go ahead, let's simulate, let me do a telnet to youtube.com on port 443. So very similarly to our cat command, here we see our telnet, we see our arguments out to youtube.com on port 443, but we can add some more metadata here, such as maybe the IP address that youtube.com was resolved to. So to do that, and another really powerful thing about Tetragon is that we can pretty much anything, you can hook into the kernel to monitor pretty much anything and everything, which is really awesome. So we also have the ability to do custom configurations as well. And throughout their docs, they step more into what are some of the key concepts within Tetragon, some of the metadata around that's being collected. So there's a lot of wealthy material here within Tetragon's documentation, which I'm not all going to cover, but But also within their GitHub, they have a lot of examples of these YAML files that you can use to monitor whatever action really that you're looking to monitor. And in this case, we're going to add some more network monitoring capabilities with our YAML file. So what I'll go ahead and do to go ahead and create our own YAML file, I'm going to go ahead and cd into the Tetragon directory. And if I list this out, you see we have two directories. We have a Tetragon conf, which we'll get to this guy here in a sec. And then we have a tetragon.tp, which just stands for tracing policy. So within this directory, you won't have anything. So let's go ahead and create our YAML file for our, I'll just call this network monitoring.yaml. And this file name can be whatever you want, but we do need the .yaml file extension. So you could convert network monitoring to whatever you want, but you will need to have the .yaml extension. And so within these files, we'll paste our contents here, which I'll also include within the Medium blog post as well, which will be linked in the description below. But the one thing I do want to point out here, now I know there's a lot of different configurations you can set, and Tetragon's config and Tetragon's documentation steps through those various options. But the one thing I do want to highlight here is that we can exclude particular events. So let's say, for example, if you also wanted to add your private network, right? So let's say I want to log my network connections, but I don't care about anything within my private network. I only want to log external. And let's say my private network was on the 10 dot. So I could add that as an additional value here, and I could save this file. And when I save this file, I also need to restart Tetragon. So I'll go ahead and restart the Tetragon service. I can go ahead and run a status on it. We, in fact, do see that it's still running, so that's good. And now if we go back to tailing that log file, and let's run that telnet connection again, and let's see what extra data that we get. Well, you'll notice that we are starting to get some IP addresses as well as some source port and destination port. So we're still getting the same data that we were getting before. We see our telnet with the argument being youtube.com on port 443. But we see this destination address. So we're now getting the IP address that youtube.com resolved to, right? So that's helpful. And we also see the destination port, which of course we already knew based on the telnet command, but we're now getting more metadata included within our events, which is really powerful because the more data that we have when it comes to our security analysis, the better. Now, take that with a grain of salt though, because not all data is created equal. We want it to be actionable, actually intelligent data that we want to collect as part of our security analysis so that we're not drinking from the fire hose. So with some extra data added, so that's cool. So let's, for example, if I run my tail again, and then let's say I want to restart my Wazoo agent. So if I do a systemctl restart Wazoo agent, you'll see we're getting all of these events now. And these are a ton of events. Let's see if I stop our tail here. Here I see that I'm running this custom job, this openaudit.sh. Now this is a bash script that I run across all of our endpoints. Which OpenAudit is a great open source tool as well, which you can check out their repository. But I know that this is a job that always runs, and I don't necessarily want to have Tetragon collect and log that data. Well, thankfully, Tetragon also gives us the ability to exclude particular events. And what I can do is if we cd into the Tetragon, we'll come now to that tetragon.conf directory. So if I cd into here, we'll see that there's already some files in here. We're not going to modify any of these, but what we're going to do is create this export-deny list. Now, this file name needs to be exactly export deny list. So do make sure that you call it that, but this will just be an empty file here. And what we can do is paste in what we want to exclude. And how are all these being excluded? And we can paste in what we want to exclude. So here we're excluding here our openaudit.sh. Now, how we're building those exclusions, except through this example, but you can see all of the various filters that you can use when it comes to defining your exclusions here within Tetragon's documentation, which I'll link to in the description below. But let's go ahead and walk through what we're doing here. So we're first defining our event. So here we have process execution and process exit. So meaning that I want to exclude for both when the process is created and for when the process is exited. If I only wanted to exclude when the process was exited, then I would remove the process execution within this array here. But since I want to include both, I want to exclude on both process being executed and process being exited, I'll go ahead and include both of those here. Now we're defining our binary, which here we have various options of where the bash binary could exist. And if we look at our example here, our binary exists under user bin bash. So if we look at the second option that we defined here, that would match. So that looks good. And then notice our argument is the file path to our openaudit.sh script. So then our arguments, regex, is going to equal to that of the file path. And it's as simple as that. So I can save that off. And because it is regex as well, there's your matching possibilities are pretty much endless, which is super helpful as well. So very similar to kind of how we define Wazoo rules as well. So I can go, once I've saved that file, I'll go ahead and restart Tetragon. And if we tail this file again, and if we restart, let's go ahead and restart our Wazoo. We go ahead and restart our Wazoo agent. You'll notice that we're still getting a lot of stuff here. And why is that? Here we still see our user bin bash, and then we also are seeing our open audit. So we're still getting all that. But notice here that that is the parent process and parent binary and parent argument. So we can also do an exclusion for that as well by, if we look at the filters, by leveraging parent binary and parent arguments. And I can build out my exclusion rules just by adding a next entry here. So I can add in as many as I want. There are no limitations there. But now where we're roughly the same, but now we're defining the parent binary and the parent argument. So I'll go ahead again, save that file off, and let's go ahead and restart Tetragon. Then I'll start tailing here. And then I'll also, so we immediately already see that it's not near as noisy. Then if I restart our Wazoo agent, let's see what our different results are. So now, sure enough, oh, we have something else, but it is not related to our open audit. So I have confirmed that our open audit exclusion is looking good, but here we can see some, and here we can actually see some PS commands, but look at the directory that it's being ran out of, the var osec directory. Now I know the Wazoo agent, how it's working under the hood is to list and display information about running processes, which we can actually see it doing here. I know that it does this at every service restart. So when we restarted the Wazoo agent, this is going to kick off again, but we're now actually seeing what Wazoo itself is doing under the hood, which is kind of cool as well, right? And it may be justified to create exclusion rules for that, because that's something that is always going to happen by the Wazoo agent. But I'll leave that with you guys to go ahead and work out. All right, so we've got Tetragon installed. We're monitoring our network connections. We've done some exclusions, but let's actually now ship these events to our SIEM stack. And how are we gonna do that? Well, we're gonna go ahead and leverage Wazoo, the Wazoo agent, to do that. But we need to first define a rule set. But first we need to see, all right, can Wazoo actually, are there Wazoo rules to detect these events? It is logging in JSON, which is great. Wazoo supports JSON out of the hood, but how can we verify, all right, when I start shipping these events to the wazuh-manager, are there any detection rules? Because if there aren't detection rules, then Wazoo is not going to match on it, meaning that it never even gets logged within our SIEM stack. So a great way to test that is with Wazoo's rule set test. So if I paste that in here and run tests, you'll notice that we're getting the decoding. So that's a great start, meaning that we don't have to build a unique decoder for this because it is in JSON, and Wazoo is very good at handling JSON. And you can see it's decoded out all the metadata, but there's no rule that it's matched against. You see it stops here. So, which means that this would not actually be logged. So what we need to do is actually create a rule for these. So to do that, I can go into my rules here. I'll select add new files, and here I'll just start this off at 700,000. I'll also add this to our Wazoo rules GitHub repo as well. call that tetragon.xml. And I'll go ahead and paste these contents in here, which I'll also include within our Medium blog post as well. So here we've created Wazoo rules to match on process executions, process exited, and kernel probes, which would be like the network connections example that we looked at. So we'll go ahead and save this off. And then once we save it, we'll go ahead and restart. And then once the wazuh-manager service has restarted, I'll go ahead and verify that our new rules are going to match by using that rule set test again. So I'll just copy any of those entries within there, and then I'll wait for Wazoo to restart. All right, and that's restarted. I'll go ahead and go into rule set test again, paste the contents in there. And now if we scroll down, we see sure enough, it's matching on rule ID 700,001. So great. So we've now confirmed that the wazuh-manager will now log these events because we now have detection rules for it. But we also need to tell the Wazoo agent to send the Tetragon log file, right, to the wazuh-manager, because, right, so what we've been doing is tailing the var log tetragon.log, but the Wazoo agent is not configured to send that yet, so we need to define that. And the way I like to manage my Wazoo agents is through Wazoo's endpoint groups. You could also, of course, add this to the osec.conf of the endpoint itself, but I think it's much more manageable to manage our Wazoo agents through Wazoo's groupings that you can define. So here I'll paste within our local files here, so which defines what files to collect, what the Wazoo agent files are going to collect. Here we have our log format set to JSON because it is JSON format, and then we are defining the location of the log file on the endpoints. And what's nice about Tetragon is also going to do the log rotation and retention for you. So I think by default they store 5 days worth of gzipped data, but after that they'll delete the 5th oldest day and the cycle will continue. But all of our current results will be logged to our tetragon.log file. So that's the only log file that we need the Wazoo agent to actually collect and send to our wazuh-manager, which is helpful. So I'll go ahead and save that off. And now when I save this file, it is going to restart the Wazoo agent on the endpoint that we just installed Tetragon on. And now we should start to be seeing those events come in here shortly. So I'll go ahead and step into Graylog to visualize these. I could use Grafana, I could use Wazoo dashboards, whichever you're using. I'll just use Graylog for this exercise. And I know that, actually, let me go back to our rule set here. I know that I've defined our Tetragon rules to have rule group 1, right? And then rule group 2 will be the various process that it is, whether it's process being executed or a process being exited or a kernel probe. So I know that I can use a filter of rule group 1 equal to Tetragon. And let's see what events that we got. And sure enough, we are now seeing events start to be collected through. And if we open this guy up, we see our meta details. Here we see our arguments. We see our binary. So here Wazoo is using the sort. We also see the current working directory that's running out of. If we do let's do our telnet again. I'll just do this off to the side. Here we can actually see my Pi-hole. So the Pi-hole is the fun little DNS server thing that you can do. Here I can actually see the Pi-hole process, the Pi-hole software running this update checker to see if it's a valid update, which is kind of funny. Let's go ahead here. I'll run that telnet command again. And here we actually see our kernel probe rule firing as well. And here we've got our telnet command. So if we scroll down here, if we scroll through this metadata here, yep, sure enough, we see our telnet. Let's find which is going out to youtube.com 443. So we see our arguments. We also see the IP address that youtube.com was resolved to, which is helpful. And we're now collecting all that metadata. So now we're getting a lot more insight into what's happening on our Linux endpoints. In future videos, we're going to step into how we can use this to track a whole kill chain or attack kill chain, right, that occurs, so that we can get a clear overview as to, hey, maybe this one malicious event triggered, but what happened, what events surrounded that maybe ultimately led to this particular alert, and we'll be able to leverage Tetragon's execution IDs, which makes Tetragon really powerful to be able to put together that whole timeline of events that happen. So I hope you guys are realizing how powerful Tetragon can be in terms of how much data it's able to observe that's happening on our endpoints, how much activity it's able to observe. Again, because it is leveraging eBPF, pretty much nothing is off limits when it comes to monitoring your endpoints, which is super powerful. And then we can leverage our current Wazoo infrastructure to collect that data into our SIEM stack. So that's going to wrap it up for today's video. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one.